Hello, I'm Kenny from Owlbot, here once again at Strangel for part 2 of the Canon Cinema EOS Roundup. Now, a lot of you have probably seen part 1 of this, where we talked about the C200, the C300mkII, and the C100mkII. Today, we are going to be talking about the C500mkII, the C300mkIII, and the new C70. This video is going to be kind of short because I can just point you to a review I did of the C500mkII and the C300mkIII, comparing and contrasting them up on provideocoalition.com. There's also a video on the Owlbot YouTube if you'd like to watch that, but the article does go into more depth with example footage and that kind of thing. I will link those in the description of this video. So really, we're going to do the same thing that we did last time and compare these three more in use case than image, because to be perfectly honest, the image is almost exactly the same across the three of these. I can't say that for sure about the C70. I have yet to use this camera, I must say up front. But for those of you who are here to learn about these three cameras, let me walk you through it. To start, we have the C300mkIII and the C500mkII. These two camera bodies are exactly the same. The two cameras are exactly the same. You've got two XLR inputs here on the back, time code, SDI out, a monitor, SDI, remote terminal, which I've never used, HDMI. I own a C500mkII, by the way. Mic and headphone. You got your little audio controls over here. Vent takes BPA 60 batteries like the old C300mkIIs and whatnot. CF Express cards, two of them, with one SD card for proxy or utility. Tons of buttons on the sides. You've got ND filters up to 10 in steps of 2, so 2-step, 4-step, 6-step. Record, white balance, blah, blah, blah. Slow and fast motion, which we'll get to in a second. LUT control, magnification. And then on the front here, we've got the PL mount. This has the EF mount. The nice thing about these new Canon bodies is they have swappable EF and PL mounts, which are just these 4 screws, pop them out, put the other mount on. We did it on this YouTube channel. You can see Josh swapping these out in 3 minutes while he's goofing around talking. I bet you could do it in under 1 if you're quick about it. So like I said, these cameras are exactly the same. There is small differences. C500 is a full frame sensor. C300 is a Super 35 sensor. The C300 has new DGO technology, which is sort of mimicking the way the Alexa processes their image, which means, I'm simplifying this, and this might not even be scientifically correct, but basically it does 2 passes of the image. It does 1 pass that is for color and 1 for detail. The result of which means that there is lower noise in the shadows for the C300mkIII. Now, that may lead you to believe that this does better in low light, but that is not the case. It just has lower shadow noise. Again, if you go and check out my review, you can see the empirical evidence of this, but the C500mkII actually does better in low light in the sense that because it has a larger sensor, the noise profile is smaller, the grain is smaller. With the C300, when you bump up the ISO, it gets very thick. C500 not the case so much, and so therefore you can correct it out easier. The C500 has more of a magenta bias overall. C300 has more of a green bias overall, easily corrected out. I was able to match the images from these two very, very easily in Resolve. Definitely could do it in Premiere. I don't like using Premiere for color, but you can do it. So why would you choose one or the other? Well, this has, the C300 has 4K 120 high speed with the full Super 35 sensor. Not everyone needs that. I'm personally not someone who would tend to use that. But what that does, you know, if you work in fashion or you make a lot of commercials, especially products, that high speed is definitely going to be worth it. This C500 here can do 120 frames, but it is 2K instead of 4K, and it is a Super 16 crop. You can make that work with proper lighting, you know, staging lens, blah, 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 blah. But objectively, the Super 35 looks better than Super 16 in the same way that the full frame looks better than the Super 35. You may not notice a difference necessarily, but when I was really digging into the images for my review, I found that I gravitated more towards without knowing which footage was which, right? I was just looking at A, B with no notice of which was which. I found that the C500 produced more fine detail, greater gradations between tones, so everything looked a little smoother. You know, it's like whatever the opposite of banding is, like further the other way, you know? And so I will say, even though, like I said, these are very, very close image-wise, I will say the C500 does eke out the C300 image-wise. But again, lower noise in the shadows on the C300. I have found that if I just rate the C500 at ISO 400, a lot of hundreds going on here, that shadow noise is gone. And I was actually talking to someone who worked at Canon, and they said that I'm hoping I'm not speaking out of turn here, but apparently, allegedly, the native ISO of all these Canon cameras is not actually 800. That's just where you get the best shadow and highlight performance simultaneously. The native ISO is actually 160 or 200. I think it's 160 because that's as low as it goes. And also, I have found that, you know, ISO across cameras, let alone the Canon ones, but between RE, Red, whatever, ISO is a made-up number. It's not the same as it was with film. So ISO 400 on this, you don't really notice a difference practically. I'm able to light exactly the same way. I shoot exactly the same way. You know, if I was going outside, I needed more highlight, kick it back up to 800 on the C500. But yeah, that's my tip to you. If you want the lower shadow noise that you get with this, just shoot that at 400, about the same. Also, the C300 image is a little more contrasty. The C500 is a little more low contrast. Big thing with these two cameras is it shoots RAW. This shoots 6K RAW, so the RAW it's RAW light. So it's essentially a 12-bit image. Really excellent full frame 6K 12-bit image, just gorgeous. Amazing to color with. You really can't go wrong. Also shoots proxies to the SD card, which look amazing. You can edit with the proxies. I've said this before. So yeah, 6K RAW here, again 12-bit. 4K RAW here, again 12-bit. The compressed format, which is mostly what you're going to be shooting, is XFAVC, and it is 10-bit, which is still amazing. 422. You do not get 6K compressed. I don't actually know if that's possible for XFAVC to handle that large of a... I don't know if the container can handle it. I would like to see 6K in XFAVC. Come on, Canon, give it to me. But for now, no. So both of these compressed will shoot 4K, but obviously full frame sensor is a little nicer. Why else would you shoot 4K or full frame? A lot of misinformation out there about full frame. Essentially, it's just a more detailed image. That's the best I can say. The distortion and the whole like equivalent, and don't think too hard about that. You're gonna blow a gasket. Read up on Steve Yedlin's stuff and then forget it and then read it again, because I guarantee it won't actually click the first time. A full frame sensor gives you more options. You know, you can shoot Super 35 or full frame, which could be handy for documentary. But it allows you to use old vintage lenses. You know, I use Nikkor primes, beautiful. And because it's full frame, you get the full character of that image versus a center crop like you would get on this, where it would be very clean, but not, you know, these days, especially with these new sensors, you want a little bit of character in your image creatively. A lot of times you do just want to go super clean. But so you get slightly more options with a full frame because you can choose Super 35 or full frame. So a full frame is not more cinematic. Every movie you've ever seen, except for recently, has been shot on Super 35. So you can still achieve cinema. It's more about your lighting, your camera movement, your audio for sure, and your framing, you know, that makes things cinematic, not the size of the sensor. The size of the sensor gives you more detail. So just had to get that rant over. Again, read the review that I wrote, provideocoalition.com/KennyMC. You'll see everything there. Like I said, this is Canon's best camera body by far. Super small, ergonomic. I love the replaceable mounts. Use PL whenever I need, use EF whenever I need. The autofocus is great, has face tracking, eye tracking. I'm using face tracking right now. It probably doesn't really matter because we're only at 35 on that. We are currently shooting on a C300mkIII using the Owl Color 709 profile, which I installed when no one was looking. So that's those. I hope that covered it. Again, if it didn't, read the review or comment below. Someone at Stray or myself will get back to you. Now, this is the C70. This is essentially a C300mkIII in a DSLR package. It is the same DGO sensor. And we have a lot of the same features here. And again, this is actually the first time I'm getting hands-on with this, so you're gonna have to take some of this with a grain of salt. The review of this will be later, or depending on when you're watching this, just go find it. Instead of full-size XLR, you've got these, oh, that's weird. Get out of there. Mini XLR. So you can get mini XLR to full-size XLR power, cables. A little frustrating, but it's a tiny little body. Okay. You've got the same ND filters, 10 of them there. White balance, full-size HDMI, which is nice. USB control, I guess. Microphone, headphone jack, just like the other ones. Uses the same batteries. This does use the DC barrel plug that I just lamented. But again, small body. Luckily, this, I think, comes with the camera. These cameras don't include a 12-volt wall power adapter, which is frustrating. Okay, over here, we've got the little wheel from like a DSL. Actually, this is on the side of this, isn't it? More or less. This wheel feels like it comes from a 5D or something like that. Menu, auto iris, index, magnification, function button, a lot of little dials and wheels and slot selects and everything. It's a very handy looking camera. Having turned this on, all your audio's back here. Can you see that? Yeah, there you go. I will say, while this little flip out monitor is smaller than the on-camera monitors here, get that back in frame. It does look nicer. Higher pixel density or something. I don't know. It's nice. And also touchscreen. And something that I appreciated when I was creating Owl Color for the C70 was when you have to type names in these cameras, you gotta click, click with the joystick. This you can actually type with the touchscreen. Nice. This is intended for, I would say, the average shooter. This, in my head, replaces the C100mkII handily, and potentially the C200, which I'll get to in a second. This has mounting points on the handle. You'd have to take the grip off, but there's a little screw here, so you can mount this horizontally and film thusly, or flip that down so it's back there. Now you may be saying that's stupid, vertical video is stupid, and you're stupid for suggesting that it's a good feature, but unfortunately, the bread and butter jobs that you're gonna do for PR companies or corporate or whatever, they shoot a lot of vertical, So having the option, like I own a C500mkII, like I said, but for a job that I know is gonna go to social, especially something that I know is gonna go vertical, like it would be nice to just have that. With the C500, at least I can set grid lines in full frame. I still get a good image, but it's nice. That's just a nice thing to have. You don't have to use it, but it's there. If you're shooting to web, this is great. The big difference between the C70 and let's say the C300mkIII, this does not shoot RAW, which, okay, fine. These shoot RAW. If you're going to be shooting 12-bit RAW light, you hopefully have a budget for data and processing and coloring and all that stuff. And whatever, anything would be nice on anything. But for the price point of the C70, I don't see that as a necessity because this shoots 10-bit 422 XFAVC like all these other ones do, these two. And that's going to be 90% of what you do, right? This is shooting XFAVC. I shoot almost everything XFAVC unless it's like, again, a high-paying job where like every bit matters, a really nice car commercial or something for a major sports, whatever, you get what I'm saying. But if you're most people, this might be might be the way to go. I am not personally a fan of the form factor, but that's me. I never was a DSLR shooter. The handle doesn't rotate, so you kind of have to be here. But, you know, if you do that, like I was doing with a C100, you know, that's not too bad. Hopefully that's not too bad. This is RF mount, which is the new Canon spec. I think they're probably going to try to move everyone over to RF throughout the years going forward. They say that the autofocus is insane. I already like the autofocus on the Canon cameras, so I'm going to guess it's somehow even better with RF. But they do make an EF adapter as well as an EF speed booster if you have full frame glass. So you get an extra stop of light performance out of your existing lenses if you put them on an RF. There was also people saying that the EF adapter that Canon makes the EF lenses perform better than native on this or other RF cameras. So I'd be interested to test that out. But you've got basically all the features of the C300 in this, as far as I'm aware, just in a smaller form factor and no RAW. Now you may be saying, well, what about the C200? That still exists, and you're right, it does. I would say these two are kind of the same camera almost. This is not the same as the C200. The C200 is kind of in a weird spot because you're either shooting RAW, which great, I mean, that sensor's still dope, but its compressed format is 420 8-bit, which it looks great. It's a very nice 420 8-bit, but again, at the price point, if you're gonna be shooting RAW, get that C200, but if it doesn't matter to you, this is probably the move because the compressed format's better, and it shoots to SD cards. SD cards are cheap. You can get really fast ones. These probably require a U3 class 10 SD card, but SD cards are very inexpensive. This takes two 512. They're getting into like terabyte sizes now, so you'll be fine. CF Express cards on these, very expensive and take up a lot of data. So like I said, I've never shot with this, so I can't speak to the specifics of data management or anything like that. But even just, let's turn it on, give it a quick little peek. It's nice and small and no EVF. These don't have EVF. I will say the joystick back here is a little goofy. It feels more sturdy than the other ones, but I don't know if I like it. It's kind of strange feeling. It's kind of got like the red style touchscreen where you can go through and bring up a little touch menu where it's like, okay, white balance, select Kelvin, boop, 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 ND, select, ISO, select, versus having to go through the menus or whatever. But you still got all the assignable buttons. I don't know how many this has total, probably more, at least 13. 13. I'm gonna say 13 buttons. So plenty. C-Log 2, C-Log 3, 709, Super 35, Super 16. This can also do 4K 120. So that's kind of the thing. Like, if you're just the sort of everyday bread and butter shooter, whether it be for YouTube or you're doing weddings or even corporate work where you don't need these beefy cameras and beefy file sizes, the C70 might be for you. I know there's that whole thing of like, you got to show up with the big equipment to make the client happy, but you can do the classic trick of like chucking a matte box on there and a big monitor, call it a day, because the image that's going to come out of this should look identical to the C300mkIII when shot in similar conditions, compressed over here. So yeah, I like this switch. This feels good. Everything feels very sturdy. It's a very pretty camera. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of oh, it's got time code. C70 has time code. So yeah, everyone was asking for a C100mkIII. I think this is what that is. So yeah, that is that. Like I said, these are going to be your commercial cameras, cinema cameras for sure, totally capable. I love these, love the swappable mounts, all that thing, the body style, great modularity, excellent. This is for everybody. You're not going to be shooting, you could totally shoot a commercial on this. Music video, definitely. Again, because it's that same compressed codec as those. But, you know, the form factor might become an issue. There's no SDI out on this, which may be an issue. You know, if you're shooting documentary, when I kind of hee-hawed earlier about the documentary thing with these, I think this could be a good documentary camera because it's small, right? You know, if you're running around in the middle of Mozambique, maybe you don't want to have a giant thing on your shoulder. Maybe this is good enough, you know, maybe just kind of popping around with that. And apparently with the AF being really, really good with head tracking. So even if people are wearing the old masky poo, it can still track them. You know, could be a good option. So that's my sort of layout of where you would use these, the kind of general use cases and stuff for them. Like I said, there is a very in-depth review of these two on the Owlbot YouTube, and more specifically, meaning more specificity, on provideocoalition.com. And then I will have a review of this up on both of those sites in a couple months, or depending on when you watch this, it's up. So that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.